accessible, because you are talking about accessibility. I hope we shall have that. The management, please. Let's. I don't know whether you have a soft copy, or she will avail us this one, and we shall see how to multiply it. We shall make a copy out of it, and people read it, because this is a very important topic. This is a very important area, and I think Africa should not be left behind again, even in areas like these ones. And as you had already pointed out, I think you have other engagements, but fortunately, we have the Commissioner. Commissioner Energy and Minerals is around. And the Chief Commercial Legal Eunuch is also around. We shall benefit from those. We shall ask them some questions, and they will give you a feedback. Because I was reading to ask you a question, as in all this, are we trying to transfer and diffuse these low carbon technologies to Uganda? Do we have in our universities, departments, in it will not take us very far. But anyway, our experts, your experts, are going to respond to some of those questions as we go along. So thank you very much. And we are going to continue, and you will get a feedback from your colleagues who have stayed around. Thank you very much. Thank you once again. I think she's giving, we are allowing you to leave. Now, dear participants, there was supposed to be a panelist from outside. I don't know the organizers whether you have the person ready or a recording, so that we also listen to him, because he was also asking for time because he was running away. Is he ready? He's not ready. So, thank you. So if he's not ready, we are now going to have panelists from around, and organizers, please. They are supposed to be, oh, no, there are three. They are supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but that one is not around, so we have three. We have the chair already here. Thank you. We are going to request them to come forward. There is supposed to be Mr. Peter Mulisa, Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs Officer, Uganda National Oil Company. Eunuch, is he around? Please take your seat here. We have Dr. Brian Isabirie, I think Commissioner, Minister of Energy and Mineral Development. Take the seat here. No, you can sit here, no problem. Here we are like in academic environment, no protocols. You can sit anywhere and you can say what you want to say without fear of favor, without fear of contradictions. Contradictions is our definition. We are defined by contradictions, so don't worry about contradictions. We are supposed to have somebody from Natural Resource Governance Institute. Is that person around? Please, take your seat here, and no fear of contradictions and controversies. I think those are our three discussants. I do not have their bios. I was not given their bios. And so when time comes for them to speak to us, I will request them humbly, I will humbly request them to at least talk about themselves and the organization they represent. Not necessarily you represent, the organization where you come from, because we don't want you to censor yourselves because you fear that you are representing an organization and you are going to misrepresent them. Here we want an open discussion, open presentations. There is no fear of contradictions because it is a discourse among these intellectuals. Some think intellectuals come from universities only. No, not necessarily. Those are maybe academics. Here we are all intellectuals, so we want to discuss some of these issues, and then later we shall have questions and comments to give to them. We don't want to waste any more time. We are going to have, we don't have to follow, we shall follow maybe from the other end. This is now Dr. Brian Isabirye. Yes, Dr. Brian Isabirye. For only 10 minutes. And remember, we shall be asking questions. We want a dialogue, not a monologue. You remember? A monologue had problems in Uganda. Before that, I am told we have got the fourth panelist. That means I'm going to reduce the minutes. Honorable Bikas Lawrence Songa, who is a member of Parliament of Uganda and I think heads Parliamentary Committee, the chairperson of Parliamentary Committee on Natural Resources. You are welcome here. Climate change or climate crisis. These days we use different terminologies. I don't know whether we are seeing climate change or climate. So, Dr. Brian Isabirye, please. We are a panelist. We are not just presenters. Give your views on unpacking the opportunities and challenges of energy transition. Unpacking the opportunities and challenges of energy transition. We shall request you to go to the podium because you need to be captured properly because we are on Zoom. Thank you. Hey, technology, energy transition. Technology transition.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Brian Isabirye, I'm Commissioner for Renewable Energy Department at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Speaking immediately after my PS and of course representative of the minister, and she has made very good remarks and pointers to the discussion around energy transition in the country. I just want to add a few comments just to emphasize some of the areas that she already alluded to. What came out clearly from that presentation is that there is no ideal energy mix that is unanimously agreed on at the global level. What clearly comes out as you talk to different countries is that the energy transition will be specific for each country and all groups of countries, but at the global level we agree about the need for transition, particularly in the conversations that we've been having in the climate discourse. It's also clear, and it came out clearly in the remarks, that energy transition will not be achieved without disruptive technologies and without radical changes in the consumers and how we are using energy. That came out very clearly. But this energy transition provides opportunities, but there could also be challenges to harnessing those opportunities. Amongst the opportunities that come out clearly is that regional and rural development is going to be possible because energy is a key driver, as my honorable minister mentioned. This energy transition will come with new industrial activities and also service industries that will emerge as the opportunities. And here we are talking about industries such as equipment manufacturing. So you're talking about batteries for storage, EV, heat pumps, and cooling opportunities. It also comes with electricity trade and power system services that will emerge because of the transition to these cleaner areas. There are immense opportunities around innovation such as advanced biofuels that we are as a country pursuing, but also emerging technologies and opportunities in green hydrogen. There will be opportunities because of the disruptive technology around digitalization of the energy systems. So aspects of artificial intelligence, big data, will be opportunities that we should, as industry, position to harness. But there are also new commodities that will emerge, and we are talking about battery storage. So aspects of lithium as a commodity have become very prominent as we look at the area of transition. But we also appreciate that the whole industry structure is changing drastically. So you're talking about aspects of efficiency. So industry will harness opportunities, or there will be opportunities in supporting customers in direct or indirect ways in optimizing their energy efficiency at that level. There will be challenges as well, as we've already mentioned, in harnessing the many opportunities that we have mentioned. Challenges such as the uncertain pace of technological development and deployment. So that is a challenge. There will be need for new technologies, and how we have these technologies accessed and deployed will be a critical area to address as government, but also private sectors and indeed development partners. The return of energy security as a prime requirement for countries has become critical, particularly with the geopolitics of energy. We've been seeing the war in Ukraine and Russia coming or bringing back discussions on other forms that countries had committed to move from. So aspects of energy security, as emphasized in earlier presentation, are becoming critical. There is also a clear lack of consensus on how fast the transition should and can take place, in part because of its potential economic disruption. So we've been having discussions across the globe on how fast the transition should be. And as a country, we have agreed to pursue an integrated approach. So there are challenges that we'll need to speak to the speed of that transition. But there's also a sharpening divide between advanced and developing countries on the priorities for transition. So the developing countries assume that we are all at a level of using non-cleaner forms, so they are pursuing a chance or proposing that we should all transition, yet some of us are pursuing access at this level. There are also obstacles in expanding the mining and building supply chains for the minerals that will need to pursue this net zero agenda. So we are looking at challenges, but it also presents opportunities for new businesses that we'll have. In summary, as I conclude, if we are going to pursue this agenda, we will all need to have vigilance, which will be crucial in several sectors. And vigilance will be needed, but that will require that we bear in mind the intermittent nature of some of these clean energy sources. So we are talking about solar and wind that can have seasonal peaks that will lead to intermittence. So disrupting our grids in a way of integrating some of these intermittents is going to be one of those things that we need to address. We also need to keep an eye on cyber security, noting that some of these power systems that will come as part of our transition will be based on artificial intelligence, and this exposes our power systems, our grids, to opportunities or to challenges of cyber security. So hacking can be a challenge if we are going to pursue this. And I want to emphasize, in the interest of time, that we need to watch out for metals with limited reserves. So here we are talking about cobalt, lithium, but also other aspects of copper. And for rare earth elements, which will be essential for producing such quantities of electric cars as we transition, wind turbines, and other solar farms. Mr. Chairman, I want to submit.
A round of applause. Thank you very much and for doing it in the stipulated time. I think you have had opportunities, which are very many. You have also had challenges, which are very many. I will still remind people of the challenge of not having our soft power. As long as we don't have soft power, we just import these hard power panels, solar panels. We import these technologies. hardware. As long as we don't have soft power, we shall remain lower on this energy transition scale. Next, as you are seated, Peter Mulisa, please, the floor is yours. He's going to present on the energy crisis as a catalyst for energy transition. You can explain more about the Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs, Uganda National Oil Company, because not many of us know about the Uganda National Oil Company. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I do believe that everybody in this room has heard about Uganda National Oil Company, and you know quite a lot. We side of things. We are a limited liability company owned by the state, and we participate in the sector across the value chain, from upstream to downstream. That's briefly UNOC.
Hey, noise from behind, please.
And my portfolio is I lead the legal and corporate affairs team at UNOC. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I'm glad to be here once again. I was here last year, and we did have a very, very useful conversation. So I'm glad to be back. And I'm happy to see a few people here. I hadn't seen my brother Kamjusha here in a while, other than on social media. So I'm really happy to have you in person, and we should be able to interact today. So Professor, if you allow me, I have a few slides, but I can't go through all of them. So I will speak to about 3. The slide on slide 6, if you could push there. But before I go into it, Professor, let me try to answer one of your queries. Are we contributing to research and development in the energy transition technologies as Africa? Or are we going to be a captive market? And unfortunately, the answer is if we do not change so much, so quickly, we'll be a captive market. We'll just be consumers importing. I've seen data somewhere that says our contribution to research and development in energy transition technologies is 0.0001. That's our contribution. That has to change. Otherwise, we'll just be consumers. On this slide, I'm just trying to show you Africa. GDP, energy demand, oil and gas production, and clean energy investment. 2010, 2015, and 2021. And when you look at it, the first line of graphs, if that's a graph, in terms of GDP against global GDP, we are below 5%. In terms of energy demand, as of 2021, we were slightly above 5% of the global energy demand. In terms of oil and gas production, we, as of 2021, were around about 7-8%. In terms of clean energy investments, we're in the spaces of 3 to 4% of the global clean energy investments. Those numbers speak to absolute lack of energy access. They speak to poverty. They speak to lack. Basically, by that graph, you don't need to ask what our indicators on human development, the human development indicators are. They are definitely bad. And so, that is the state of Africa as of today. What are the population indicators? I will just focus on 2. Without electricity. Without electricity, in terms of numbers, as of 2021, we are close to 700 million without access to electricity. And without clean cooking, we are close to 1 billion. So literally nearly above 70% of our people have no access to clean cooking. Why is that important? It is important because it speaks to the state of our economic positioning. And why is that important in the debate of energy transition? Because I believe the last time I was here, I showed you a graph, and I can, I think, show you another one that basically shows that energy consumption and economic growth are synonymous. The less you consume, there is no question about your poverty. The more you consume, your standard of living definitely improves. And I want to show you a slide on slide 7. So today I just decided I was not going to put words. Let's speak graphs, pie charts, and see how that language communicates. This can be plotted against the whole world, but it specifically looks at the US, and it is looking at per capita GDP growth rate plotted against per capita energy consumption rate. And as you will see in that graph, which spans more than 4 decades, 1961 to 2013, per capita GDP growth and per capita consumption of energy rate are synonymous. They are moving together. Okay? Slowly, I want to drive my point. My point is that for any human being to improve their lives in the current civilization that we are in, they must increase their energy consumption. It is impossible to talk of wealth in any country, in any society, with no energy consumption or with low energy consumption. So, Africa is poor today and must grow. The only way to grow is to consume more energy. So I think we can settle that as a baseline. And then we can discuss the hows, the what types of energy. But the baseline must be for us as Africa to grow. Those numbers must absolutely change. Okay, so let's look at global primary energy demand over the years and what it has done to the developing, what it has done in terms of development. So that graph, that plots from 1850 and looks forward to 2050. And it looks at energy usage and growth in the world. And you will see that between 1850 and 1900, the Western world, the Western economies were industrializing, but they were largely reliant on biomass. And then coal came in, and coal became cleaner, and it replaced biomass. So there was an energy transition around about 1900. So the transition we are talking about is not the first one. There was an energy transition in Western Europe. The Western economies, because you would include North America as well, and Australia. And then you will see that between, and if you go back to oil and gas, if you go back to Titusville in Pennsylvania, before you come to Iran and the Middle East, you'll find that the period of 1870s was very important in the discovery and usage of crude oil. And then coal in Europe around about the same time. So, as you move from 1900 to 1950, you can see that the oil and gas segment of things, or fossil fuel, become dominant. And you can see that the growth of these countries rapidly took off. And the standard of living significantly improved in those countries. 1950 to 2000, and then you can move to 2016. you see a surge in consumption and a significant surge in use of fossil fuels and significant growth and improvement in lives in Western Europe, in China, in the North America, in all these countries that we call the OECD, or the developed countries. Now, as we look forward from 2016, 2030 to 2050, you see that fossil fuels demand continues. But there is a significant, there's a steady increment in renewables. And the projection here is that you'd have probably about 14% overall renewables by 2050. And this is a projection from McKinsey. So most of you would know that McKinsey is very reliable. Now, we have SDG 7. And SDG 7, amongst other things, focuses on access to clean energy. So now, the balance, the reason I'm giving you these items is to basically set a stage for a conversation on how we transition. So, SDG 7, universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services. And increase in renewable. So we have, on one hand, significant contribution in the world energy mix of fossil fuels. We have a need to increase renewables. We have a growing population all over the world, but significantly in Africa. And we need to transition. Okay? So, my view, and what I want to conclude with, is we must find a solution to deal with our carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions that supports continued growth of nations, that increases the portion of renewables within the world energy mix, that ensures that fossil fuel production is cleaner and sustainable, and that is what Africa must fight for. That's what the world must absolutely come to. And that's the decision that faces us. That's a conversation that faces us as CSOs, as academia, as players in the government, as players in the private sector. There is no panacea in this conversation. You cannot say close fossil fuels and we'll have a transition. No, you will destroy the world as we know it. You must allow natural, sustained replacement of one source of energy by another. Now, where does Africa sit? And that's what I will conclude with. The PS has said we need to fight to have universal access to electricity for Ugandans. We need 10 billion. In our nationally determined commitment of 2019, we said we needed 47 billion to support our transition. And that 47 billion US dollars is money that we don't have that our friends should be able to provide to us. And that money is not available. So how do we get it? We must sustainably harness all the resources that we have to support our energy transition. And I dare submit a moderator and colleagues that energy transition is going to require a balance of all energy sources with renewables as the focus for investment, but to slowly take its replacement, to replace fossil fuels. And it is going to take decades. So what do we do with fossil fuels? Fossil fuels must be supported to be developed in a sustainable manner to support the renewable energy transition. And I also dare say that we do not have one transition. It is impossible, it is impractical, it is not fair. It is an argument that cannot be sustained. We shall have transitions. The Western world will have a different transition because of where they are and their historical contribution and their current contribution. And Africa must find its own transition, must define its own transition. Middle East will have its own. Asia will have its own. And this must be accepted as the correct thing to do. And CSOs, academia, need to drive this agenda because it's the only practical way to transition. Lastly, I want to urge everybody in this room, look critically at Uganda's nationally determined commitments. Look critically at a transition that supports Uganda to get rid of poverty, to get rid of lack of energy access, and as CSOs, drive that agenda. A practical agenda that says get out of poverty, access to electricity, and once you do that, you realize that our transition cannot be the same as the transition of the United Kingdom, of Germany, of North America, of Japan. Ours will be different. I thank you.
Thank you very much. CSOs must drive this agenda, and we have somebody who is going to talk about natural resource governance, and we want to see whether the CSOs have the specs to drive the agenda. How do you drive when you have no seat in the car? The floor is yours. Your name, please.
Thank you, Professor. You know, today my job is much easier. And I'm not going to talk very much about governance. I'm going to introduce, it will come, but it's not going to be overriding. I'm going to introduce...
We thought you are from the Natural Resource Governance Institute.
Yes, I'm from the Natural Resource Governance Institute.
And you are not governing.
Within the framework of governance, I'll talk about a new phenomenon.
Okay, please.
I think as part of this energy transition, and everybody has been talking about reduction in the use of fossil fuels. And I think Mr. Mulisa has ably put it, that we need to manage that transition. I'm going to talk about something...
Your name, sir?
My name, sir, is Paul Bagabo, and I work for the Natural Resource Governance Institute. The Natural Resource Governance Institute is a think and do tank that is based in the US, and we have offices across the whole of the world. Our mandate is to increase benefits for citizens in resource-rich countries through technical assistance, research, and capacity building. Most of my time over the last 10 years has been on building the capacity of the citizens and civil societies resources. Most of our work was on oil and gas. We had when we introduced this concept of energy transition. I want to say that I'm happy that over the last 3 years, we've been able to engage with government and to accept a roadmap, which is a win-win situation for everybody. And that roadmap has been shared with everybody. Now, we want to create a new roadmap, which is a triple win. This is that while many people are asking countries to reduce use of fossil fuels, many countries have minerals that will be on demand when this energy transition takes shape. And as Dr. Isabri has said, some countries will have a slow transition. That means that they will wean themselves off fossil fuels in between 2050 and 2070. Why? Because the state of the country, as Mr. Mlisa has said, requires that you take it slow and use your resources to transit. Other countries will have a fast transition, and by 2040, many of them will have reduced the consumption of fossil fuels. The problem that we have as a country is that most of our fuels will need to be exported to those countries. Some of it will be used here in the refinery, but I won't go into that. I want to discuss transitional minerals. What are transitional minerals? What are critical minerals? Green minerals? You'll hear all this terminology. And it depends on the person who is talking. For countries that are demanding these minerals, many of them will talk about critical minerals. For countries that are supplying these minerals, many of them will talk about transitional minerals and green minerals. They kind of mean the same. These are minerals which will be needed when energy transition takes place. What does it mean to be needed? That if we move from fossil fuels into renewable energy, the overriding need will be to store that energy and to transport that energy after it has been generated, whether wind, whether solar, whether all other forms. And to store that energy will require batteries. Simple. To transport that energy will require cables. Simple. And so these critical minerals, and we've listed some of them there, will be necessary to move this energy once it has been, to store this energy and to move it to where it is required. I think we can discuss further what that means. But I'll also say this. These critical minerals don't occur independently. Many of them occur with what you call major minerals. For example, gold, copper, and all these other minerals. So in terms of governance, Professor, it will be very hard for you to distinguish the governance between transitional minerals and the major minerals. You don't necessarily have to. We'll move on to Africa. Africa has a potential, and it has these minerals, and it has a potential to supply, as we've set it out there, to supply most of the minerals that will be required when transition takes place. Most likely, about a fifth of the minerals required in a car, we shall be able to supply this. But the problem, and maybe we'll get into graphs, the problem is that the concentration, you can move on. Move on. While Africa has a concentration of these minerals, the rest of the world has the concentration in processing these minerals. Africa, for example, DRC has about 68% of the minerals that are required, cobalt, for example, but the production process thereafter is outside this continent. And the main reason for that is the investment that is required. Next slide. The investment that is required to refine these minerals and use them is quite high, and we've heard really about the cost of energy transition. The cost of turning these minerals to be used in Africa is still low. Exploration hasn't taken place because there's just no money. And so the link between fossil fuel use and energy transition is exactly to try and provide the resources that will be required in energy transition. And so when we have this discussion, I hope we shall bear that in mind, that for the continent to transit and for us to benefit, we might require resources, and this, as the PS said, these resources are not forthcoming. Nevertheless, government should not enter a race to the bottom just because they want to develop, to get the resources and develop the minerals. And race to the bottom, for many of you who are working on these things, issues around exemptions, issues around incentives, and so on and so forth. These people, as we pointed out, will need these minerals. And so this is a time for Africa to benefit from the use, from the existence of these minerals. So you don't really need to attract them. They'll need them and they'll come to get them. Just before that, one simple one. No? Okay. I think we'll move on. So, next. There is, oh, that one. No. Yeah. There is a challenge, though. There is a time element. That because of technology and other concerns, the use of the minerals that we have will start declining. And we've just given an example of a battery. The percentage of cobalt in modern batteries is reducing. And so as Africa, you have a time frame. This is not going to last forever. You need, our estimates based on our research shows that we have another 28 years for the use of cobalt, for example. And so within that period, it's very important for us to make use of the resources we have. Otherwise, technology will overcome this. And then the minerals will be useless. And we've given the example of a battery. The percentage of cobalt in batteries is actually reducing. And ways the causes for reduction is twofold. On one hand, of course, are image issues, and people will talk about these concerns. On the other, it's the technology that is changing. The technology for storage of these energy sources. And so we need to manage two things. On the one hand, manage the governance of these resources, especially in the production. On the other hand, we need to ensure that we are up to date with the technology because this is changing rapidly. I'm going to conclude on two things. The first one is that our best hope is in taxation, because we don't have the capital to turn these minerals to batteries, for example. And it's very expensive, and we cannot compete with the countries that are already at that stage, China and a few other countries. So our best hope is in taxation. So we have to structure our tax regimes to ensure that citizens can continue to benefit from the existence of these resources, because the amount of investment required for energy transition, and the ministry officials have pointed out, is actually high, and we don't expect that many people will invest in this sector back at our homes. The other benefit is regional integration, and I think Dr. Isabia touched a little bit on this regional basis. I think as a country, as a region, the only benefit we might get is to work at a regional level for financing, and the PS pointed that out, but also for the technology. And a number of countries have already started going that direction. Zambia and DR Congo, I think, have an MOU for the production of batteries. And I think at AU level or EAC level, there might be need to push for that. I'm going to wind out by talking a little bit about the winds. One of the key concerns, of course, is that these minerals exist in sensitive geological areas. There's need for concern about the environment, and so there must be a consideration on environmental and social concerns, as well as the quest to mine these minerals so that we can benefit. I'm going to stop here for now, and thank you.
Thank you very much. You ended up talking about governance without stating it. And now we are talking about governance. We are going to hear the Member of Parliament talk about these issues of energy transition. And by the way, yesterday I listened to the State of the Nation address. I didn't hear minerals. Did you hear the minerals, you, the Member of Parliament? And if so, why not? Because minerals are very critical. And I think minerals have got the potential of socio-economic transformation in this country, I guess, more than other sectors of the economy of Uganda, because they have they are high value resources, I think, compared to others. The floor is yours. You can reintroduce yourself, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Apologies for coming late. My name is B. Kaloren Songa, Member of Parliament for Ura County in Zombo District in West Nile. And in Parliament, I'm the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change, and I also sit on the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. I want to thank Siatini for the invitation. This is a very important topic where we are talking about energy transition. But what is energy transition? I'm sure the people who spoke before me have already defined this to you. But to me, I think it is basically the shift from the fossil fuel use or the fossil fuel based systems of energy in terms of production and also consumption, including this will include oil, natural gas, coal, shifting from there to renewable energy sources such as solar and wind. And as you hear this, you automatically know that there are opportunities, but there are also challenges. The whole agenda is to provide affordable and reliable energy while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Why are we talking about energy transition? Because of climate change. We are saying we have to shift from fossil fuel because they are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. And at the same time, we have to be resilient, and our production system must be low carbon. And that's what we are saying. And countries made commitments, especially through the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution, Uganda updated. And along that line, we made a commitment that we are going to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases by 24.7% as a country. So the activities, the initiatives we need to put in place to reduce these emissions. At the same time, we also need to reduce emissions from other sources like methane emission. Methane is another serious greenhouse gas, and that requires a lot of technology. Our clerk is here. We are coming up with a motion, especially in relation to decommissioning some of these dumping sites. Others call them landfills, but basically they are dumping sites because they are generating a lot of emissions. So overall, when you talk about the decarbonization agenda, I want to start on that point from the political angle. Last month I was in South Korea and I was talking about some of these issues. And one thing which I told them clearly was that because of decarbonization, developed or industrialized countries are now rushing to Africa, to Latin America, and parts of Asia to look for where these minerals are for transition. And that's already a source of conflict. And you will never see those conflicts in countries without these minerals. That's why you look at Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan and South Sudan, Chad, and some of these countries in the Sahel. So these countries in the east and the West, they are now competing to get large shares of land where these minerals are, because we want to decarbonize, because they know those will be in high demand. And therefore, as someone stated earlier, as a country, we must now design our strategy in the local context. Our policies, laws, and regulation governing this transition must be in the local context of Uganda. After all, if you look at the UNFCCC, the clause is talking about common but differentiated responsibility and capabilities. So along that line, we must design our policies and laws in the local context of Uganda. There were pressures when we talked about oil. There were pressures from civil society, especially in Europe, when they wanted to block the bank in Germany that promised to be carbon neutral, and that bank was trying to give some money to Total Energies so that they can do our pipeline here. There were pressures in Europe. Personally, we went and met the commissioner in Brussels. The commissioner is the highest ranking civil servant in the EU. We said, what if we are going to do yes, we know that the oil may generate some emissions, yes, but what if we are going to manage 100% of that emission? Will that still be a problem if we want to build a house like this? Definitely, you will cause a lot of dust, a lot of rubbish, but after, if you can clean it. So if we can go for this kind of calculation where you generate 1,000 tons of emissions and you absorb 1,000 tons of emission, what is the problem there? Fortunately, when we were still in Brussels, then we saw in the North Sea, they were now launching new oil fields, opening new oil fields. So that is the double standard we are talking about. Now, those double standards may not necessarily be addressed by the PS. They will be addressed by politicians. And that's why sometimes political decisions will be important when we are negotiating with these people, and so that we can reach a win-win situation. So for us, as far as the role of policymakers in the decision, in the discussion of the energy transition, for us we are looking at how we can bring affordable energy, and the energy must be reliable, industrial, and strong, and also affordable for the population, so that we can say we are now transiting, but as we transit, we must also build our economy, because without energy, we are not going to do anything to our economy. So that should be our focus. So in our legislation, in our appropriation, in our oversight and representation roles, we have to make consideration on this so that it is favorable for the population. One person was talking about budget. Yes, we do appropriation, but the money which we put in our budget must be raised locally. If there are no businesses, if not many people are paying taxes, how are we going to generate this money? So that is a big question. We have put in this budget about 52 trillion. Do you know how much actually is supposed to be allocated? It's only about 17 trillion. And that 17, we are also not sure whether it will be raised. So we must look at local innovations, local sources that can generate income rather than relying on the green climate or multilateral funds like Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and so on. We must try our best to generate our money locally. We don't have any sanctions, so why don't we explore our minerals? And these minerals are needed. And if we can get our minerals out, we shall be able to raise all the monies for our budget. We don't even need to borrow. Some people are excited about oil. When I was working in Southeast Asia, especially near the South China Sea, those people have 17.7 billion barrels of petroleum and natural gas. Here in Uganda, we are talking about 6.5 estimated, but actually we are talking about 1.4 billion barrels. That's very small. You cannot compare the money we are going to get from oil with the money we can get from minerals. So we must explore those areas. But the last political thing we are also doing is in all our engagements at the regional level and also Africa level, also international level, our position is one. There are people who have already caused this climate change. Uganda's contribution to climate change is about 0.08% emission. Africa is just around 4%. So who has caused the climate change, which we are going to suffer even if we stop causing it now? We are still going to suffer for some years to come. Politically, we must ask for payment for this damage from the international community. And it can be in two ways. They can put money, a basket fund, for supporting developing countries rather than that procedure of the Green Climate Fund, which is not working. They are not even contributing to it. If they can put a basket fund to address this, or if they can cancel debts for this developing world because they are the ones who caused the damage, then we can start at par and we can talk about all these things at a level ground. So these are things which require negotiations. But also why we need our own energy sources here. Even if someone is trying to block our petroleum activities, you can see that we are also causing a lot of climate change by importing. If you look at the Bank of Uganda statistics, they are talking about, at one point we are spending about 3.4 trillion shillings on import of petroleum. And then again, we are importing using these trucks, not even standard gauge railway. At least if it was maybe a railway, the emission would be little. But now there are so many trucks bringing for us this petroleum product from Mombasa up to here and driving. They are also causing emission. If you calculate, this is to the academia and people are doing research. You can also do that kind of cost-benefit analysis. How much emissions are we causing by importing petroleum from outside? And how cost-effective it is if we had our own petroleum sources here. So these are things we need to use for awareness raising, and that will really help us in our strategy. Then the last point is on the e-cooking. Yes, many people are talking about, in Parliament we tried our best to remove value-added tax on liquefied petroleum gas, thinking that this would make gas cooking cheaper for the people in urban area, and then it will reduce pressure on cutting trees for charcoal and firewood. But still in Kampala we are using charcoal. Why? Because much as this has been reduced, even on the solar panels, we have removed the value-added tax. But still, the cost of solar is still high. Why? Because the materials for making the batteries are still being taxed. So these are some of the areas we think we can play around the policy lines so that maybe we can reduce pressure on our trees and forests as we talk about energy transition. And also, we are talking about maybe people should start promoting e-cooking. But still electricity is very expensive. But what we are pushing for is, if only the electricity we are generating, if it can be evacuated and taken to the people, maybe from that we can also reduce pressure on our forests and on our watershed. But I can tell you we are paying almost around 292 billion shillings for dim energy. Energy we are generating, but we are not using. It is being generated. And for sure, that kind of agreement was not good, where we are paying for generation. I generate my energy here, whether I evacuate it or not, you will still pay for what I'm generating. That's wrong. So if we can evacuate this energy we have, the electricity we are saying we have excess, if we can evacuate them to the people, and then we shall now start talking about how we can bring the tariff, the electricity charges low, so then many people can now use electricity for their own value addition, for their own processing. I think that will be very important. Finally, the degradation of this forest and watershed is still going to affect our energy sources. If you destroy the forest, which is bringing for you the rain, there will be no water in the rivers. And if there is no water in the rivers, then you cannot talk about hydropower. So we are also encouraging that people who are putting electricity plants must also give alternative livelihood for the adjacent community to some of these power plants or in this very important watershed. So basically, in our role of legislation, representation, oversight, and appropriation, we are looking at policies and laws that can be favorable enough to make us move on this energy transition, but in the local context of Uganda, in the local context of Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable. And in your role of oversight, we shall ask you maybe to make sure that the next State of the Nation address does not miss out on minerals. At least I didn't hear about minerals. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, Siatini doesn't want also to go without chipping in. And in this regard, we have another discussant from Siatini. I hope this is Penny Nambabazi. Is that correct? Please go on the podium and you also tell us from the civil society NGO perspective how to understand energy transition from an Afrocentric perspective. Not Eurocentric perspective or Western-centric, but Afrocentric or Uganda-centric. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. As Siatini, we are really glad to broaden this discussion, given the need to have inclusivity, especially when it comes to how many people or how much do people know about the energy transition agenda. And my role really will just be to also add and supplement on what has already been mentioned, but also to give a clear position to how we are looking at the energy transition discourse currently. And for the most part of this discussion on the energy transition, we definitely see that the most highly impacted groups in this discussion are really going to be towards mainly the African countries, but especially in terms of Uganda, we do see the marginalized groups, the poor women who are in the villages, those that are actually trying to find ways of moving away from, to renewable energies sources. And some of this has been recognized in some of the areas that have been mentioned. But basically, for how we position ourselves as Africa in this discussion is something that has continued to be limiting, especially to how we see our dependence still on fossil fuels, but also given the fact that the energy transition itself has been more of a strategy proposed by the global north, especially the European Union in its Green Deal strategy, where this mainly aims to cut the greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. And Africa's emissions, the percentage is about 3.8%. So you really see the position that we're in. It doesn't favor us, neither is it going to come to favor a number of the different people that are going to be impacted by this in Uganda as a country, but also towards the people themselves. And also in regards to how the extractivism approach, when it comes to the minerals that we have as a country, as a region, or even in Africa, most of it is being extracted by the global north. And we get to realize that even while we believe that we do have these minerals in place here locally, but our position is that we are going to either be constantly put in a dependent arrangement where we do depend heavily on a number of the products that we see are going out. For example, when it comes to the different minerals that we are producing that already was highlighted, for example, the 68% that is from cobalt, that is mainly in DRC, 28% of barite, 24% of phosphate from Morocco, tantalum, which is mainly from DRC, which is about 36%. You're definitely seeing that even most of these products, these minerals, will definitely have more going to European Union, which is really taking about 75% of these minerals already, and 90% of them are actually going to be outsourced from Africa. So you get to realize that we actually do not have a favorable position in this discussion. We're either going to be left as heavily dependent on the commodities, especially how we import a number of different commodities. We shall still be left on the receiving end of that and not even exporting most of these to have value addition, to even be able to have, to ensure that they actually enhance a lot of our productivity. And also given on the turn of our industrialization as a country, or even in Africa, most of the developed countries that are ready for this energy transition are heavily industrialized. As Africa, we are getting onto that discussion. We are already in it, but for Uganda, where we see ourselves, how best are we able to say we are actually having our industrialization sector heavily protected, even when it comes to a lot of these EU directives and positions. Also basing from how also, I could give an example of part of the directives that we have seen that are going to be heavily impactful, like the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And this is mainly targeted to tax imported commodities, such as fertilizers, steel, aluminium, iron, cement, electricity. All these come from us, from Africa. But they're going to tax when it comes to us actually, EU importing these products. So once, this is mainly to curb on the emissions, given that they look at fertilizers as having a percentage in carbon emissions. But you get to also ask a question, how really is it possible that as Africa being having only about 3.4% and 3.8% of gas emissions, for carbon emissions itself is also not that much. But they are going to be able to have this directive, once passed, will actually impact on the tax of most of these areas, these commodities. So there's a challenge when we see the general discussion about the energy transition, most especially how well we are really ready for it, but also in terms of when we come to a number of the areas that have been mentioned, our fund to manage the damage that will come from having these projects, what will be left for a number of the people who are going to be impacted by a lot of these projects that are going to take place in the oil sector, where we will be finding a lot of challenges when it comes to compensation, fair compensation of people, the land issue, being that most of these projects are going to need a lot of land in terms of how they're able to carry out a proper transition of our oil, but also in regards to even other areas as we keep on growing into the ideal way of structured transformation and development. So there's also a continuous need for us as Africa, but mainly as Uganda, while we try to bring this down, we want to make sure that this discussion definitely can be thought through broadly, especially on the different proposals that we get to see. But we also find that it is a bit limiting to how far we can engage. It's not a discussion for only civil society, as mentioned. It's really a discussion to also have other main stakeholders, government, the private sector. CSOs can do so much also. but we are also getting to realize there's a limit to how far we can push this discussion, especially if we are not having one harmonized approach to it. And also the fact that most of these discussions on the energy transition, it's trying to create a one-size-fits-all kind of discussion, where it is that Africa is on the same position as the EU, which is not possible. And when you get to realize that the fact that we are still growing, even when it comes to our industries, when it comes to how well we're even trying to do better on exporting, our trade imbalance itself in regards also puts us in a difficult position. How best can we be able to ensure that while we are also pushing for a fair and equitable energy transition, we're able to also ensure that we shape ourselves in a situation, in a better position where we can actually engage further to see to it that we are not on the tail end of the receiving discussion. Because you get to realize that most of the time, Africa has been put on the tail end to how far we are able to receive a number of these benefits. If they come to it, if they actually are tailored to meet Africa's needs, there would be actually a broader approach to how this discussion could be shaped. And when we look at the financing, we know that definitely, just as mentioned, there's a limit to how the developed or the global north is able to actually finance our issues. Even when it comes to debt, even when it comes to our climate challenges, we cannot forever rely on external donors or sourcing. And for the area of focusing on tax, while it is one that is really also recognizable that it can actually close the gap on financing, there's a need to ensure that we also strengthen how far we're able to fairly tax, use our resources, but also tax the right entities or the right people who can be able to ensure that this financing comes from them, especially when it comes to multinational companies. Those that we have realized have taken more than actually given back to the resource envelope or even in generating tax or domestic revenue for the country. So there's a need to see to it that we definitely change a lot of these discussions now rather than later. And given the fact that we know as Africa, we are really positioned in a critical position when it comes to our resources, given that the fact that we even see China that has even come in to take in a lot of the minerals that we do have here, and also other countries, but mainly in how we also position ourselves in the production part of it. For example, China itself has a vast majority of the world's solar panel supply chain, and that already we know 75% of that on the solar panels is being manufactured and processed directly using minerals or minerals from Africa. So there's a need to see to it that we can be able to find ways of not being at the tail end of this discussion. Energy poverty, definitely, we are definitely seeing that a growing rise in how people are able to actually use or transit into clean or renewable energy. And we are still having a lag in that area because most of the households, 90% of the households, depend on charcoal and firewood. And even then, we get to realize we have not really, as a country, been able to change this kind of discussion. And well, as much as we would want to enhance the energy transition, we need to look at it at a holistic approach on who exactly is going to pay or be impacted by this this process. Yes, just lastly, mainly part of the things we would like to see. We would like to see the need for parallelization of the Africa mining vision and for Africa to reduce the technology and financial dependence in the effort to transit. Africa needs to finance its own transition And this can be achieved through the reliance of its own critical minerals and the beneficiation through the African mining vision. And I feel this is something that we need to emphasize as also part of our recommendations, but also as proposals that we can talk about here in the plenary, and see to it that we can have a fair and inclusive energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you have heard from all the different peoples, from NGO, from Parliament, from the oil industry sector, governance sector. Incidentally, as we go on, do we have a dialogue framework in which all these different actors, stakeholders, can always engage? I am talking about here an institutionalized dialogue framework on the energy sector. Last time when the EU was talking about our oil and our pipeline, I had the civil society sector on one side, government on the one side, and they were just talking at each other, and they were talking differently, and there was no institutionalized platform in which all of them could come together and talk. Each one was dismissing the other, and were talking at each other, crossed each other, and there was no dialogue framework. Who is going to come up with this dialogue framework? Maybe somebody has said the civil society can be the driver, but in this case, I think the state has to be the driver. Otherwise, civil society can be closed. Whereas civil society cannot close government, because there are civil societies which were closed, maybe because they talked much about the energy sector. How can we have a platform where to dialogue formally, institutionalized, so that we don't talk across each other? I want to beg here your indulgence that I think our energy levels are going down. We're talking about energy sector now. And since we are on Zoom, I don't think that we can afford to have a working tea. We shall continue disturbing each other. And I wanted to ask those online, the virtual participants, please, you'll bear with us that we shall have some 15 minutes break. And I mean 15 minutes because we are not very many, so that we could, I hope tea is ready. Is tea ready? Organizers? Yes? Yes, let's go and have a 15 minutes break for tea, for re-energizing ourselves, and then I will ask our panelists here to come back, and we now have a dialogue. We shall avoid a monologue. Please, if that is agreeable, I want to say that those who are serving tea, or if it is self-service, let us do it quickly, so that in 15 minutes, we are back here for the plenary discussions. Thank you very much. Our 15 minutes are over. Those who have not had the cup can continue have it. Those who are still taking, you can continue taking, but make sure that you listen and don't engage in further conversations. That is now the seminar governance protocol. Let's now listen to each other, and we can give our viewpoints in the form of a question. If it is a question, you mention any one of these people here, either by name or by title or by organization. But in case you don't want to ask a question, but you just want to make a comment, you are also free to make a comment. We are not going to bracket you into asking a question, even when you have no question. But you have a supplement, a comment, agreement, or disagreement, as long as it is constructive disagreement, without being impolite. So we are going to have now a general dialogue in which we are going to interact. But since from that side you are many, and we want to give as much opportunity as possible to be inclusive, let us restrict our comments and submissions in not more than 3 minutes. Otherwise, I will stop you from this end. Not because I dislike your contribution, but because we have agreed that let us be democratic and inclusive. So, who wants to have it first? You are still digesting the food. Huh? As people digest, but in a few minutes, please. Respond. Where is the mic? I don't want to be disarmed.
Thank you very much. When my PS was speaking earlier on, wanted me to mention the statistic that from 2000 to 2020, Africa received 2% of the global financing in renewable. That is 60 billions out of the 2.8 trillions. That's 2%. So as we are discussing financing, whether local or external, it's important to put that statistic into consideration, that most of the financing will most likely have to come from our side. I thought I should mention that. Mr. Chairman, you also continued mentioning aspects of capacity building. This is critical and it's key. And it's capacity at all levels, from operation and maintenance all the way up to high-level training. And as a ministry, there are some initiatives that we continue seeing, both by government, but also private sector and indeed development partners. You note that through the International Solar Alliance, we got support and we are setting up a center of excellence in solar, and indeed it will be expanded to other technologies in that space. So there will be a center of excellence at Busitama University. That started with support from the Egyptian government that gave us a 4 megawatt facility for capacity building. So we are now adding a center of excellence supported by the International Solar Alliance. And beyond that, we have some centers for training, particularly for skilling, operation and maintenance capacity. We have an Akawa Institute for Training, and a few others like the National Power Systems Training Center that we are going to establish with support from World Bank. That's in addition to the many universities that we are having. I thought I should mention that, but I also wanted
but before you go very far, what about research? Because we want to see software, not only hardware, that they give us solar panels and this and that.
So the center of excellence that is being set up is going to cover the whole space of capacity building, including research. But now, Professor, you appreciate beyond that research will have to be funded. So the funding will have to come from different areas, but this center of excellence is supposed to build capacity right from research for development, but of course the softer skills as well. Yeah. So the other one was the framing. And I'm glad that we are now discussing the way we are framing the conversation. Every time we frame energy transition as a loss of opportunity, then we start discussing the effect on the vulnerable groups. I think it's our opportunity also as a continent and indeed as a country to start looking at the positive side of energy transition. And we are not in any way saying that we should transition everyone. There will be steps. We've said it will have to be contextualized. But it's important also to look at the many opportunities, and I mentioned some of them. The jobs that can come, the attention to Africa, because then there will be demand for some of these resources that maybe in the past would not have had that kind of attention. So as CSOs, as we discuss, let's look at the positive side that we don't look at a transition as negative and we start framing it that way, because then our community will start looking at that. An institutionalized dialogue platform that Chair, you talked about. In the framing of government, there are platforms that have been set, and this is where we will discuss whether they've been sufficient. So from the ministry level under the program working group, so we have a program working group on sustainable energy development. It has CSOs, private sector, development partners, and government. So there is a platform. We can discuss whether it's doing enough in convening partners to have these kinds of conversations. At the CSO level, I'm meant to understand you have a dedicated CSO group with over 260 CSOs registered to discuss renewable. And I know it is hosted at Environmental Alert. And we used this platform to invite those partners that are leading that group to the National Renewable Energy Platform, which is an institutionalized dialogue platform launched by the ministry. It brings together development partners, private sectors and CSO, and the government to discuss. It's an institutionalized platform. And we went through that particular renewable energy CSO coalition to get representation. Maybe that's another way we could discuss this. So, and I know my colleague from Petroleum will also have similar platforms that have been set up. Whether these are being sufficient or we need to improve these engagements, I think that's a topic we can discuss. Sir Chairman, I want to stop.
But before you stop, is that platform wide enough to include all minerals, or it is only about oil and energy?
Oh no, the one that I talked about is renewables. So it brings in aspects of minerals to the extent that they support this transition dialogue. But still, looks like, because most of you have not been part of it, again, that's a gap that we realize as government. Probably we need to do more to make it more inclusive and make sure that all the voices are heard.
Thank you. Somebody else wanted also to chip in quickly. It is you. Don't disarm me. Bring.
Ideally, the Policy Committee on Environment is supposed to bring coordination of all the stakeholders involved in this thing. And that committee is shared by the Prime Minister. But it appears they don't meet regularly. That's number one. But also you get the issue of MDAs not collaborating, working together, and yet we are doing apparently similar or related things. So it is that policy committee that needed to bring people together. But for us in climate change, as a climate change committee, we want to know and we want to generate a database of all civil society organizations, government, academia, and private sector that are saying they are working to address climate change. We have already written to CANU to bring for us all the lists because we want to map out. Yes, we know there are activities taking place around the country. We want to mark that sub-county where you are working so that we can also know that this civil society is working on climate change issues, this academia or private sector is working on climate change issues, because the 24.7% contribution of Uganda is not going to leave the work of civil society out. So we have to work together along this line. Thank you.
Thank you. And we want to start with somebody online so that we don't lose him or her. I'm told there is somebody online. Can we have that person online? Make your submission.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor and the team.
Hope you'll be audible.
Yes, please confirm that you can.
Is he or she connected? He's going to type the question.
Are you able to hear me, Chair?
If not audible, maybe he or she can type the question.
Chair, I'm not so sure if you can hear me though. Can I proceed with the submission?
In the meantime, can we have somebody else? Ask that person to type the question. We shall read it to the audience, and then we shall get answer. Let's begin from this side. Yes. The mic, can the mic please go around?
Thank you so much, Doctor. First of all, just two things. I am also happy that we are having this discussion. My name is Robert Riachira, Deputy Executive Director of the Environment Shield. I want to be on record that just last week, we hosted an environment parliament through the Parliamentary Forum on Climate Change and the Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change, Honorable Songa Lawrence, which he chairs. My sister Claire here, she was our clerk, and we had a very constructive engagement. And to answer the question, Doctor, you raised about the issue, who is going to lead this discussion? I think where we are right now, we can't afford a situation where we are going to say that it is only going to be civil society alone. Professor, you advise that government should be able to lead the discussion, yes, but all of us must come on board because, number one, the Africa energy transition must be a collective effort for all of us, not at the national level, but also at the citizens level. And that goes to the issue of inclusion. How is the Africa energy transition going to be as inclusive as possible? I was just joking with my sister Penna here that you are very tasked to balance the panel because the panel doesn't have any lady. And I said, is the Africa energy transition going to be a men-led transition? Where are the ladies in this discussion? Where are the young people, the youth, who are actually over? Africa is a young continent. If you're talking about the future, Africa is running Agenda 2063. We should be seeing young people, the National Youth Council, the UNSA, all these vibrant young people leading the front line of the energy transition. But also very importantly, Doctor, the aspect that I want to also underscore is when we were in the break, we had a very constructive engagement between me and my friend Dickens and my friend Peter. We despite almost all of us belong to the same generation, we seem to be at cross purposes. Why? Because number one, if we say, Pena said that we should harmonize Africa's mining vision. Peter was telling us about Africa's energy vision. So, if I can ask all of us in this room, how many of us have addressed our minds to those two important instruments? For example, does Africa, as Africa, because we are at different levels, if you look at, for example, Nigeria, if you look at South Africa, and look at East Africa, we are different levels of energy levels, talking about energy poverty. So, and Peter posed a very good question, which we all must ponder on. We are transitioning from what? Are we transitioning, if the definition of energy transition is from fossil fuels, to what extent is Africa using fossil fuels? That should be a very critical question that we must all interrogate. We know that over 70% of our people actually use firewood and charcoal. If the president is issuing a directive that no charcoal burning and no in northern Uganda, what alternatives are we putting in place in order to address issues of deforestation? So for me, I think that the prescription we are getting, and I want to enter from an environmental perspective, that we must be very holistic to these issues. Because when we had that environment parliament, there are two contesting issues that came up. Number one, our government of Uganda, under the Ministry of Water and Environment, has passed what we call the National Determined Contribution. Now, the NDCs are
what is that? Repeat it.
The NDCs, those are the National Determined Contributions, which is a voluntary commitment by the government to see how we can address issues of carbon neutrality. Now, if you followed Prof, the budget framework paper of 2023-2024 got a 60% climate response certificate. I hope you saw that certificate for the first time. Now, what we should do as people in this room is to see how do we ensure that as a country we focus ourselves to make sure that our budget framework and the budget response and actions are climate resilient. But also most importantly, if our NDCs, we need about 28 billion US dollar to implement those NDCs, what are we going to do to ensure that we mobilize the finances so that we implement these NDCs? The Ministry of Finance has established a climate finance unit. How do we ensure that we see that that unit is very robust and very active to say that we mobilize these green funds? So if we don't do that, then it means that we are going to keep lamenting, and at the end of the day, we shall simply be playing a catch-up game. Yet at the end of the day, we must compete with the entire fraternity. Because at the end, Prof, I want you to know that the challenge we are facing, colleagues, is that while some of us are speaking in cross purposes, our ordinary people need a clear vision. What are we going to do, first of all, to address poverty, but at the same time address issues of environmental conservation, reverse biodiversity loss, and address issues of climate change? So we must be very proactive in our approach. Thank you so much.
Maybe we should know from you also, as far as sustainable development goals are concerned.
Yes.
The reporting system, who is now monitoring and reporting from Uganda's perspective from the civil society side?
Thank you so much. You see, the government of Uganda committed itself under NDP 3 that we are going to, by 2027, we shall have achieved clean and renewable energy for all. That's the commitment under NDP 3. Now, what you're asking about SDGs, SDG 7 says that we must ensure that we achieve clean and renewable energy. Now, who is reporting? Under the framework of reporting of SDGs, the Office of the Prime Minister has a secretariat, the SDG secretariat. Now, the reporting mechanism under the SDGs is under what we call the VNR, which is a voluntary national review that is done every year. This year, Uganda was supposed to come up for review because it was last reviewed in 2020. Now, in 2024, Uganda will again come up for reviewing. The latest report shows that Uganda, we are stagnating on almost all SDGs. Why? Because at the center of the SDG is the issue of environmental sustainability. SDG 13 on climate action, SDG number 14 on life underwater, SDG 15 life on land. Now, if you're talking about deforestation, which is a big change we are confronting, our forest cover has been declining from 24%, now just 8%. You know the struggles we're involved with the issues of Goma forest. So the issue of SDG reporting and the monitoring is supposed to be coordinated by the Office of the Prime Minister. But we as civil society, also under the NGO forum, we are supposed to make a contribution because we're supposed to have 2 reports from government and civil society. Now, for us from civil society, we have been trying to monitor how government is implementing. But it's just recently when the government integrated SDGs into the NDP 3. So we are lagging so much behind according to the agenda which we are setting. And the years are running out. It's supposed to be 2030, but we are just lagging behind.
And the process of NDP
3.
4 has started
the cycle for NDP 4.
Please, let's hear from your colleague.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, the panel. You've done a very good job. My name is Anthony Olimba from the Climate Action Network, Uganda. I want to address myself to about 2 or 3 issues. One is first to appreciate the council from UNOC on the issue of transitions, because you asked, people are talking of transitions, but then we have transitions, a number of transitions. I want to add something on the transition called just transition and bring in elements of equity, because the debate we've been having for the last number of COPs has been on how do we transit, how do we manage the transition from fossil fuels to renewable fuels. And it was very controversial. The more developed nations were saying we should leave the oil in the ground. But then Africa and the Arab world asked the question, so how shall we develop our economies? Because when Qatar, Doha, at one of the COPs, and at the GCC, so Qatar asks the question, if you want us to keep our oil in the ground, oil and gas, what alternative do you have for us? Aren't you creating more vulnerability? So the same question comes to Africa. If you keep the oil in the ground, what alternatives do you have? I know Africa has a very high potential for renewable energies, But the issue here, I think that we are grappling with is normal issues of human rights, environmental and social safeguards. I think the PS addressed herself to that issue. It is still a bit of a challenge. Then the other element is on the what you call decolonizing or the recolonization of Africa because of the energy transition. We are seeing so many countries, especially after the Russian-Ukraine war, Germany particularly, moved to Africa. The minister, I think, for energy there was all over African countries trying to sign new contracts on oil and gas. The issue is around how to avoid the recolonization of Africa in the name of the energy transition or in the name of managing energy. So we need to address issues of equity, issues of human rights, issues of environmental and social safeguards. If we don't do that, then we're not going to manage the transition. We all need energy, but how do we get to that point where we have a balance of either renewables, a bit of fossils, the phase down? I know in our civil society
Try to
world,
summarize.
yes, in our civil society world, there are extremes on phase out, but Africa needs a just transition, which is looking at how do we phase down slowly as we develop the other alternatives. That's what I wanted to contribute.
Again. So I move to this side. Hey, she's there. She was speaking the mic. I thought she was going to speak. No, in the middle. Let's go to systematic. Anybody here? Go back. I will lose touch. And I will be undemocratic. Let me be systematic.
I want to start by thanking all the people present here for discussing and talking about the development of Africa and the people that live within it. I have 3 simple inquiries that I want to address to the panel and the people here. Concerning the communication about energy and natural resources and the transition from fossil fuels to green energy, how do we harmonize? Because you find that the people you want to encourage to transition don't even know the information that is necessary. You find the layman is listening to the CSOs who are more active on social media.
And laywoman.
Yes, and the laywoman are listening to CSOs that are more active on social media, but they do not get the information from the side of the government, who is talking about practicality, rationality in the process of energy transition. We are listening to people who are saying that keeping the oil in the ground is what is best for us. But then the government is preaching a different message. What is the government doing to ensure that the layman and woman get this message? That they finally understand that oil exploitation, mineral use is important to us and is necessary, but it can also coexist with protection of the environment. Secondly, I would like to hear your opinion on creation of green zones. For example, we are looking at a situation where, as we said, we want to balance the utilization of fossil fuels and renewable energy. Is it possible to create green zones where we say, in this area or in this region, there is completely no use of fossil fuels? It's completely renewable energy. And then we localize the utilization of those fossil fuels to industries, to areas that are more in need of them. I feel that it will be more economically viable and environment friendly. For example, we look at tourism sites, urban centers, and other different areas that can easily transition to greener energy. These places need the sensitization, they need the resources, and they need the manpower to enable them to transition easily, but they are not getting it. And they are capable of doing so. And also the government can create policies whereby the industries and the other people who are in need of the fossil fuels use them, but manage them properly, and then the green zones will mitigate their emissions by using renewable energy.
As you wind up,
Yes, lastly, what is the communication with the manufacturers, the processing units? Is government talking to them? Because sometimes we find that the general population is doing their part. We are trying, we are reducing our emissions, but then the major stakeholders, the people with the finances, are not touched by the law. They are completely left alone to do as they wish. Is the government taking steps to also put a limitation to their utilization of these fossil fuels, or are they going to be left to do as they wish? Thank you very much.
thank you. If you want to find out in Africa and Uganda in particular that we don't have values of green energy or green what, you start a green party. You see, in the Western world, especially Europe, there are green parties, and they are doing very well. They are almost getting to 20%. You start a green party here, you may be lucky if you get one MP. Oh, we are still here. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I'm Mugisha Imam. As she has said, we can't forever rely on donors. I mean, if we can look at African perspectives, are there any mechanisms to fund our own transition? Yesterday and the other day, I was lucky to be part of the group that was reviewing the petroleum policy. And one of the recommendations that came out clearly was the issue of the energy transition. But if you look at the draft very clearly, the preamble talks about energy transition. But if you look clearly in the objectives, they are not there.
What is not there?
The energy transition, the objectives.
Hey.
Okay. So we had the suggestion, and I wanted, if at all comes at the floor of Parliament, I wish Honorable to, represent us clearly. We had the suggestion that we have a certain percentage of, petroleum fund. Our suggestion was from 7 to 10% of the petroleum fund, help facilitate these transitions. And second, if we are to review the African vision and leadership to really tackle the emerging issues of the energy transition and how we can increase our energy consumption, as Mr. Marisa said, I beg to submit.
But as Africa and Uganda and the region, we are playing the catch-up, and technology evolves very fast. So before anything, I mean, as for us, we are starting. The developed world has already changed something else, and they are again giving conditions. Because for us, we're just there to listen what they have done, and then we catch up with what they are doing. And that one may not help us so much, because like I heard from one of the panelists, as Uganda, we have already resigned to defeat that we cannot compete in this process, in this whole process. We cannot compete with the development world in generating new solutions. But I think as Uganda and the Africa as the region, we needed to up our game, especially in the research of new solutions that are Africa-oriented. Solutions that can help us to balance between the new technologies that are coming up and already what we have. And the findings of those research should be put to use. The challenge that we have, especially here, is you hear a lot of innovations coming up, but there's a very big disconnect between those innovations and commercializing them. For instance, in the recent past, as Uganda, we came up with something on manufacturing of electric vehicles, which is actually a good thing as part of the process of the transition in the energy sector. But that one should have informed us in another research of how to make the batteries that we are talking about, because the resources that we need come from Africa. The resources that other people are using come from here. But for us, we are saying we cannot manufacture them, we cannot develop them because we cannot compete with them. So shall we continue being at that level of listening to what they are doing, and then we play a catch-up role, or we develop our own solutions that can help us. This can only be done through developing our research systems and then ensuring that the research findings are commercialized.
But informed by what value and what principle? In Bolivia, they have bon vivre as a principle, as a value in which they are anchored. In Uganda, in Africa, where are we anchored in terms of values and principles? Let's go to this side. Yeah, I'm coming.
Should I?
You know you can start, provided it is this side.
I think, you know, I'm short, so I get an opportunity to be seen when everyone is seated. Thank you, Chair.
Your name, sir?
My name is Adventino Banjwa. I'm a PhD fellow at MISA. So, Chair, I want to begin to emerge from our esteemed discussants and the keynote. So, I've been following an argument that seems to be on the margins, and it's a consistent argument. First from the keynote, but also I think from all our discussants. So I sense a kind of consistent resistance from all our discussants, but also from the minister. So the minister, through the PS, told us in the morning that our reality is one of energy poverty, right? And Chair, if you allow me, I will give a few examples from our discussants. So I will use Ndugu, which is more, so Ndugu Isabire said that developed countries assume that we are all to transition in the same way, right? So in other words, this idea of transition cannot be thought of in a flat way, right? And then Ndugu Mulisa suggested that our reality is one of absolute lack of access to energy. I'm giving a few examples. So there is that consistent resistance to the idea of energy transition, right? That this is my reading, so you bear with me. So if this reading is correct, and I've seen also from our submissions that the idea of energy transition cannot be our debate, you know. So Turiachira asked, transitioning from what, right? Reproduction of the same discourse of transition. So I am suggesting, and I think Penina mentioned this, that part of what we need to transition from today maybe is this idea that what we call the Western world should define the discourse on which we look at our realities. So our panelists have been, you know, snippets of realities here and there. Can we think our reality and then emerge from that to see what kind of conversation can we have? So because it seems that this discourse of transition is being imposed on us. And Penina said that this is the strategy of Europe. You know, they know where they are going. And we are following, as he has been saying. So I think part of our challenge today, Professor, how do we emerge from the realities that have been mentioned and then think our context and see what kind of conversation we can have, not this conversation on transition when we have nothing to transition from. Thank you.
At least we would want to transit from firewood.
Thank you so much. Firstly, thanks a lot to the panel. I think it was a very brilliant discussion. My name is Blair Ntambi. I'm a lawyer with KT Advocates, but I'm also a researcher with the Mineral Law in Africa Institute, seated in University of Cape Town in South Africa. I have 3 comments, and I think these are informed by my study of mineral law and petroleum use in Africa and research and interacting with some of the countries that are doing well with a just transition. I think the biggest discussion, the voice that came in the room is there's a bit of a conflict. Is it just the energy transition? Can the energy transition be broadened in definition? I think when you read this document, they try to spread it. I think the Africanization, the inclusion, the equitable energy elements try to define what a just transition would look like. But one of the things that I think should be informing this discussion on the onset is the kind of regime we get when we get partners that are involved in, for example, oil deals or even just mainstream mining. Do we have a concessionary agreement with them? Do we have a contractual regime with them? What terms and conditions are there? And how can we cluster or incorporate elements of the 5 years of incorporating the Paris Agreement or implementing the Paris Agreement in such negotiations? Because we feel that most of the discussions that can be very helpful for just transitional discussions have to start from when we deal with a multinational company that is coming into the country. So if the country is very intentional, and I listed about 6 things. One is, can we include renewable energies in all our negotiations and be very intentional on those? 2, can we have a clear plan on reduction of deforestation with focus on, for example, planting fibrous plants in the in the mining communities, for example, hemp, because these are able to absorb most of our toxins in most of these areas and kind of contribute to the just transition or even renewable energy that we want to admire. We need to be very intentional on impact assessments. I think this has been a big challenge, I think, for countries such as Uganda, where the impact assessments, how the mining community is going to be affected, how the general public is going to be affected. Sometimes these reports may not be very satisfactory, but we proceed to give these licenses, we proceed to give these deals to these companies. But if we're able to ensure that we put those bottlenecks there, we would clean up even mainstream mining, because that still contributes to the renewable revolution. Then we need to ensure that we're also very intentional at the level of negotiating our mining agreements as a country on how we dispose our mining tailings. There was a video, I think, about 2 days ago on social media on how much was being sent to the swamps. Of course, we know the swamps do a lot of cleaning up and they save the day. But if we don't have a clear policy on how we deal with mining tailings, that can also be a very big issue. Lastly, on climate, dealing with climate risks on closure plans. I think this is a discussion that I've not seen very intentional in the country on how we can discuss decommissioning. We know we have the ECOP, we know we have these projects. They're brilliant projects, and when we practice them, when we implement them, they're going to be an absolute big revolution in this country, in the economy. But can we plan on how we decommission? Oil is a finite resource. When it is done 20 years from now, what is the plan to uproot that pipeline? So can we maybe also engage? That also cuts across on other mining activities, for example, gold, for example, all of that. Can we plan to see that when we're discussing or negotiating, we plan with the MNC on how they will deal with the climate risks at the end of a project to make sure that we safeguard climate? There is 2 issues. One was on taxation. I would just merely suggest, can we look at the gold formula tax policy? The commissioner brilliantly described this, that we need to have a kind of specific tax to encourage maybe mining of the critical minerals. For example, the ecosystem of creating a battery cell, where you need the cobalt as the raw material, you need the anode cathode power as the processing, and then you get the renewable energy product, which is the battery cell. But can we maybe design a tax regime that can kind of support mining of critical minerals in a very safe manner? Because we're not just jumping, we are transitioning. And the verb to transition also includes elements of carefulness from where you're coming from to where you want to go. And lastly, there is an issue that the proposition you gave on an institutionalized dialogue sector for the country. My only concern with that is if it is put in place, can we also ensure that it doesn't hamper negotiation? From the description you gave, you have government on one side, you have civil society on the other side, you have mining communities on the other side, and they seem to be at loggerheads on what they really want. But that is the real situation room in a typical negotiation of mining. I've been privileged to sit in a mining agreement on some of our clauses between, for Sasol and Petro SA, courtesy of the research institute that I do some research for. But the actual reality is civil societies are always on the other side. They will try to protect and preserve the integrity of the mining communities and safeguarding these climate risks, while sometimes government has seen the economic benefit and how much, for example, Total is going to pump into, and they're biased in one sense. So you need that mind of sobriety at that level, but you also need the mining community themselves to tell you that for us, we are fishermen. You want us to get into oil and gas. So how are you dealing with those of us that are not ready for that transition? Generally, I believe we can transition smoothly, and if we implement what is proposed in some of the documents, I just picked some of those that are also reflected in the Paris Agreement. But when we look at those things, for example, deforestation, it's a very African thing to plant trees. So if we are not intentional on that, and we said, no, let's wait, this is not ours, renewable energies, those are foreign things. If we don't start with the baby steps that are suggested in some of those documents, but also dealing with how we can safeguard the environment from the current mining activities, then we are not really making any step towards the transition. And I believe we can because there is the will. Thank you so much.
Climate movements in Africa. We have NGOs which have energized the engagement in these hotels and good English and all that. A lot of good English and French as the environment is destroyed, as energy transition is stalled, because we don't have a movement that can go there on the streets and in the villages and in the forests and in other places to make the voices of the majority heard. I want to be democratic again. Those who are in technology, can we get somebody online? Because we are supposed to have our colleagues online who should also be involved. Is it possible? Hey, let me get somebody from there. Because we seem to be limited here. If it can get through, please. If not,
yes, thank you. Thank you. I hope now the sound is connected. Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, moderator. This is Domitiano Owori from the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. I want to appreciate the participants in the discourse, great engagement, and this is the kind of engagement that we need. An engagement that is balanced, an engagement that is objective, an engagement that takes care of what actually the reality is. Allow me to just highlight a few aspects. On the energy transition definition, really, Uganda should not be pushed into taking what the global definition of energy transition is. Uganda has to define energy transition depending on its own circumstances, and that is what will determine the path, the direction, the trajectory that Uganda takes. Every country, every region is going to transition differently. The transition that Uganda needs cannot be the transition that Europe needs. And therefore, we should not be followers that since Europe is transitioning from fossil fuels, since so-and-so is transitioning from this, we have to transition in the same way. Our population relies on firewood and charcoal. That's what we should be transitioning to. If you talk of transitioning from fossil fuel, what is it that you're having now that you want to transition from? And there is a whole big misconception that energy transition is transitioning from fossil fuel to renewables. but have we actually looked at what is the bigger picture? In environment management, you don't solve one problem by creating another one. What is going to be the environmental impact that is going to result from the massive rush for the mineral and extraction of mineral, more so in the global south? What is going to be the pollution like from the massive exploration of the minerals? Will it be better than the emissions that would be coming from the oil and gas development? We have to do a net environmental benefit analysis. You're looking at all options, and then you go for the best option. Africa, if the submission from the gentleman from the Natural Resource Institute indicated that Africa's transition minerals are less explored, where does that put us? Is that what we want to use as the only competitive advantage? We must be able to explore all our comparative advantages in the situation that we are in. And then we must be inward looking first, because that's what every country looks at. If you look at what has happened in Europe, when the Russia issue came in, everybody went to look at their energy security first. So how secure are we as Uganda? Our energy security must take center stage. So before we look into the global movement, how secure are we? What is our future like? Nobody is going to give us the future that we need. It is us to define that future. So we must be very, very objective in our path, in our positioning. And colleagues, there is room for everybody to participate. This country is very, very democratic. So we have room for everybody. Right now, as I speak, there is ongoing development of the energy transition plan. And I can tell you the level of engagement of civil society, diplomatic teams, and all the interested parties. So everyone needs to come and bring in all their opinions, such that at the end of the day, we have an energy transition plan that is for Uganda, that speaks to Uganda's situation. Not an energy transition plan that is simply mirrored on what the rest of the world is doing. Africa needs to have the resources to be able to fund its climate actions, whether you're talking mitigation, whether you're talking adaptation. Where are those funds going to come from? We've seen what has been happening in the climate change at international level. The developed countries have failed to regenerate the resources. So we must look inwards to be able to generate the resources, the financial resources that we need to develop even the renewables that we're talking about from our internal sources. Otherwise, we shall be daydreaming. And the resources like petroleum resources will give us a lot of opportunity right now. We want to be able to generate those resources that we can be able to use to develop other sectors, to develop renewables, to develop the infrastructure, and all this that needs to be prepared as adaptation to climate change. But lastly, and for the benefit of of time, it is very, very important for us to really prioritize our energy security as a country. And colleagues, in all the engagements, let's remember that no country is going to put our priority first ahead of theirs. Every country looks inward before it looks outward. That's why when you go to climate change conference of parties, every party comes, or every region comes with positions that are designed to defend their interests. So we should therefore define what best meets our interest, and that's what we have to defend. Equity has been missing in the whole climate change management issue, and without that equity being integrated, we must be able to look, we have to be able to look inward. Otherwise, no one is going to take care of our interests. I submit for now for the interest of time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, except I hope he's still listening. I am not sure how inward we should be, because we are now in the East African community. And we are supposed to negotiate as East Africa if we have to have strengths. So isn't there a dilemma? If we are going to negotiate as Uganda, then where is the East African Community Treaty? Because the East African Community Treaty is saying we should negotiate as a strong voice as East Africa. This dilemma is like I have had Bubu. Personally, I don't agree with Bubu. Because if you say buy Uganda, build Uganda, and you are in East Africa, and you are in East African Common Market, then what about to buy East Africa, build East Africa? Those are contradictions. Anyway, any other person online? Democracy.
Here.
Yes. Online.
The microphone is here.
Online. Not there. So he can come in.
I thought you were waiting for the person online. Yeah, Professor, thanks very much. I want just to mention 3 things. The first one is actually whether we appreciate why there is this movement of energy transition. Because I think science is clearly indicating that there are reasons and fundamental reasons that we have to move away from fossil fuels. And I think in Africa and other poor countries, the discussion is, yes, we know the dangers of fossil fuels, but we are poor. We don't have clean energy. What do we need to take into account the dangers of fossil fuels, but also address our immediate problems? So if countries like Uganda and Africa as a continent appreciate that actual fossil fuels is a danger to our survival, and I think everyone in this country, we've seen the impacts of climate change. If we are going to push those who have been polluting, of course, me, I don't see that actually the argument of saying Africa contributes 3.8% of the emissions, that whether we take it or not, there are people who have polluted, they have made money, and if we are not going to have that moral authority to pressure them to stop, I don't think we can actually start exploiting and we'll reach that level. We may not reach there. But if we have the moral ground, we can actually push them to stop and compensate the damage they have already caused. So that is an area that I really think that if we appreciate that there is a danger by fossil fuels, then we should say, let's discuss energy transition. And the next thing is, what does it take for a country like Uganda, for a continent like Africa, to define and influence that energy transition? Because I don't think we can say we are going to leave it. We are part of the global world, and it is a reality. Because take an example, if the West was to say we are not going to invest in fossil fuels, Africa doesn't have money to invest. So you would still get stuck. And one question is actually, whose agenda, if we are talking about fossil fuels? I know Peter knows that right now the country called Uganda is not investing real money in the oil sector. All the money is from the West. The 20 billion US dollars required to start exploitation must come from the West. They are the ones going to define the terms and conditions. They are the ones going to define whether we survive environmental and human rights. So at the end of the day, we even don't have the agenda for fossil fuels. We depend on them. And the impacts are going to be the ones to decide. Lastly, is the question of how we do our governance. Because if we look at the West, in terms of institutions, in terms of compliance with the laws and policies, I think they have moved to that level. Here in this country, even us, like CSOs, when you talk about, you bring like an argument that actually we cannot continue with oil. I can assure you next time you'll get problems. And most of us have gotten problems of that. And because that debate is not allowed to flow, it becomes a problem. I was telling Peter, we have the electricity sector. Those people who are following the electricity sector. And I think the PS was talking about Karuma. Karuma Dam, which is costing us around $2 billion US dollars. And the Simba Dam that is costing us around 560 million US dollars. Those two dams were started in 2012 yes, 2012. Right now, Isimba was commissioned in 2019, just last year, but last year was almost being swept away by water. Karuma was supposed, which is a 600 megawatt dam, was supposed to be commissioned in 2019. Up to now, it is not yet what? Commissioned. A project that takes like 5 years to be commissioned. Do you know how much cost it gets? And at the end of the day, you'll find whether you produce that electricity, you cannot use it. And the government people will come here and say, we don't have electricity. Electricity is very expensive. We need to produce oil in order to help people get electricity. But when those dams were going to be built, some of us, we did whistleblowing to IGG that the companies didn't have the competence to build the dams. Government forced and gave them the contracts without open bidding. At the end of the day, we are suffering that consequence. So I really believe that the question of governance is going to determine whether we are able to do research, we are able to define the kind of transition we need, we are able to ensure that that transition benefits or meets the needs and aspirations of our citizens. But if we are going to say we don't want transition because others exploited oil and they are moving, we also want to exploit, and yet we are not the ones in charge of even exploiting oil. We are just also dependent on the other ones. But the reality is that oil and other fossil fuels are dangerous for humanity, and we must move away from them. I think that is the reality we must take into account. Thank you.
Thank you. I want us to go back to online. It seems there is somebody online. Joan? Joan online, can she get through? Unmute. Joan, unmute. Unmute yourself. It seems we are not getting her. We shall go back to this side. And can we have the mic this side? You say behind maybe. Because the three people who have just spoken were from behind. Were from here. Let me chair the meeting, please.
Thank you, Prof, for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for the brilliant and spot-on discussion that we're having on the just transition. It's quite timely, and we really need it as we undertake policy making. My name is Aaron Werehe, and I work with the Ministry of Finance in the Climate Finance Unit. I have one issue to raise, especially to the audience from the civil society. I think we need to also transition from zero-sum activism. Zero-sum activism it's either this way or no way. We have to be a little bit more accommodative, because regarding this just transition and energy, what have been from the past, what has been happening, it is either an East African oil pipeline or no pipeline. Or you don't want a pipeline at all. It's either fossil fuels or no fossil fuels. How about you find a common ground or something workable? And this goes to the issue which was raised by the colleagues from the National Oil Company about the contextualization of the just transition. Because whereas fossil fuels cause climate change, we all know that, so does deforestation do. Cutting down trees for charcoal, you're also causing climate change. So you're trying to suppress a poor country like Uganda from trying to extract its fossil fuels to develop. It even defeats the whole definition of just because just means your justice. You're trying to be to be fair in a way. This is a victim of climate change. It accounts, like they said, Africa in total accounts for 2.3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We are a latecomer to industrialization, so we are just industrializing. Our emissions are so negligible. So if we are going to expect to be on the same table and transition at the same pace with Japan, with EU and others who are already, you know, who industrialized in the 60s and from the 1850s.
Try to summarize.
I think it
We
is
are getting
it may defeat the just transition definition. But also lastly,
we are getting late.
Yeah, lastly about financing. Yeah, I think we have the unit and we are trying to map the different financing products and mechanisms which can support our energy transition and the energy sector at large from domestic and also external sources. And we've been having conversations with the engineer on this. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody online who can get through now? So we go behind now. Anybody on that side behind? And then in the middle, behind. This side now, behind. There was somebody who wanted to speak. He has transitioned. There is nobody behind. We want to make sure that all sides are participating. So we can now get from any side if there is nobody from behind. And if there is nobody from the audience, we can now come back to our panelists. Yes. Please. Speak through the mic.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Adventine again. This is a form of question to our panelists. If they can also, because part of the question is the agency that is supposed to champion this, what we are calling transition, the state. So if they can talk about their views on this agency of this.
In UK, there is a movement called the Extinction Rebellion, something like that. Have you heard about it? Extinction Rebellion. It is Extinction Rebellion of Uganda. We are coming back to, it is Extinction Rebellion of Uganda? A movement. No, not NRM.
Thank you, Doctor.
No, this time the movement for energy.
Thank you, Chair, for provoking us into real action. I started up a platform called the Green Society, which brings together, in fact, the DNA of that platform is actually the movementism. But I didn't want to call it movement because the word movement is not very popular, especially with young people. So the attempt of us actually ensuring that we rally all citizens, not really from NGO perspective, but really citizen-led activism is actually the way to go. And indeed, on what you've just mentioned, I'd like also to ask, and allow me to quickly, Honorable Songa, you've said that you're going to work with the civil society organization, and you're actually doing the mapping exercise. You've called CANU to actually usher you with the lead. What we could actually don't even ask, you can even start from and even mobilize ourselves and be able to give you that list of the people who are actually willing to buttress the efforts of the parliamentary forum and the committee. But also something to ask to Peter. If as a country, under the NDC's framework, we have committed ourselves to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions from 22% to 24.7%. Now, isn't that one now going to be a departure from our aspiration as a country? Because remember, the NDCs are a creature of the Paris Agreement and Article 6, which says that climate change has what we call the we achieve the issue of loss and damage. Now, if we as a country, we are now departing from our vision as a country and we're saying, let us exploit our fossil fuels, how are we going to reconcile that in actionable points?
Point taken. As you know, we are supposed to stop at 12:30. So, members, now we are coming back at this side. We shall begin from this end and we end up the other end. For people, this way. Here. Hey, where are you going? You are taking a wrong route. Is that the African way of transiting? Please.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief.
Honorable.
We made the Climate Change Act, and we provided for a certificate that no budget of any ministries, department, and agencies can pass on the floor of Parliament unless it is accompanied by a certificate issued showing that there is substantial amount of money put in the budget to address climate change. And this year was the first time we tested that certificate. Unfortunately, the time was not enough. Although the minister laid the certificate on the floor of Parliament, there are about 15 parameters to analyze in the budget framework papers. So this is an appeal also to academia, civil society, in the next budget, if you can help. The moment budget framework papers are out, and then we can share it with you so that you can also help to do the analysis to see that there is substantial amount of money. That is how we are going to involve you. Because out of the 15, about 15 parameters, they only analyzed 3 of them, and then they say there was substantial amount of money. Don't be surprised to see that next year, the Minister of Water and Environment will still start crying, saying there is not enough money in the budget, and yet the certificate was laid because few parameters were analyzed. That's number one. Why we brought that certificate issue in the law is because originally we wanted to create a climate fund, a climate change fund. But Minister of Finance said, no, there are too many funds, youth fund, women fund, there are so many funds. So we don't want to create another fund. So we say, how can we get money for climate change? That's how we brought the certificate. There are only 2 certificates in Parliament, that one of gender and climate change. And then, fortunately also, the issue of creating climate finance unit. But my appeal to climate finance unit, work together with the related MDAs. It is good you are starting to map, but I have already also got information that many organizations are running to climate finance unit thinking that there is money there. They are still doing mapping of who can help us, but work together. And then on the issue of petroleum fund, I think that is a suggestion from civil society. On the electric vehicles, yesterday the president was talking a lot about the electric vehicle, the Kira Motors, that we need to put money there, that agriculture cannot help us in the long run because even the United States, there are only about 2% people involved in agriculture. You remember I shared that speech. But the focus was on this electric vehicle because yes, we are using petroleum and gas, but not so much. But we also want to develop other renewable technologies. For us, we are for energy mix as a country. So I think along that line, we can also see some efforts we are putting in place for this energy transition. I don't want to talk much. I think basically these are my comments. Thank you. Sorry. Maybe one thing that lady raised, I think she was more focused on awareness issues. So I think much as we are talking about these things, these are people with funds and so on. How about the grassroots people? I think it is good to strengthen awareness so people can collaborate with the young people. I think that will be good.
Those who studied education or have read Paulo Freire, there is a difference between awareness and consciousness. You can be aware but not conscious. In other words, you can be aware but do nothing.
Thank you very much. I think I would say that at this point we have a dilemma. We want to use these critical minerals, but exploitation of the critical minerals will still require fossil fuels to transform them. And even when we transit, we'll still need petrochemicals, things like roads and so on and so forth. So we need to take a lot of these things into consideration, that even with with critical minerals and will still require some element of fossil fuels. So that's one dilemma. The other is the dilemma between exploitation and sustainable environmental management and social concerns. And in our suggestion, many of you will read this triple win report that we've, the research we've done as NRGI. We are suggesting focus on environmental management, which is very important because there are some areas where there's need for this continuous focus. The third one is on the governance, and we cannot emphasize well enough that you need to negotiate good contracts. And if you can't negotiate good contracts, whatever you want to do, if you want to do beneficiation, you need to negotiate good contracts. If the resources are not available and you want to bring international companies to support exploitation, you need to negotiate good contracts. Beyond everything is the need to do a survey and find out how much you exactly have. Because if you don't know the quantum of what you have, you cannot negotiate it. And so as a country, if you want to benefit from critical minerals, I think you need to look at those critical areas. Thank you.
How do we negotiate contracts, by the way, in Uganda? We need to know, because it could also be a secret space where we don't know how contracts are signed. How can the citizens, through either private sector or civil society or even the parliament, get involved in the negotiation and signing and ratifying treaties, contracts, and whatever? Because even I am told, according to our constitution, I think in Uganda, parliament has nothing to do with negotiating international contracts or treaties. They don't ratify. Whereas in Tanzania, parliament ratifies. In Uganda, it is only the executive. If a minister goes and does not understand the contract and simply signs and comes back, that's it. I don't know.
I think in oil and gas, we've changed the mechanism for contracting. Maybe you can discuss that. Even in the new Mining Act, I think there are modifications that have made it a little bit more transparent. I think I'll leave that to you.
No, thank you, colleagues. Very good comments. I just feel like we need a continuous discourse. And probably the next one should be focused on something in particular, so that, because the details are just, the conversation is too broad. In terms when you talk about energy transition, you talk about minerals, you talk about energy access, governance, it's very broad. But starting with the last comment that my friend Paul has pushed to me, how do we negotiate agreements? So for oil and gas agreements, the 2013 Acts, upstream and midstream, defined how production sharing agreements are negotiated, which are the key commercial agreements that determine how we get the benefit from the resources. And that is aligned to the constitutional provisions relating to minerals and oil and gas. The Mining Act, the new one, has a similar structure of negotiation. For international agreements and treaties, those are laid before Parliament. The intergovernmental agreement between Uganda and Tanzania on the crude oil pipeline was ratified in our Parliament. So Parliament did exercise its authority in that space. And I believe the other treaties have a similar treatment. Now, coming back to the conversation today, I feel there are two things we need to look at. So energy transition, and I want to agree with Adventino's conclusion, not his facts, but the conclusion. What is energy transition? The Honorable Member of Parliament gave us a definition, that it is moving from fossil fuels to cleaner energies. Now that definition is not ours. Correct? The graph I showed you here, which if it can be put up, we are still in the 1850 space, where majority and an overwhelming majority of our people is using biomass. So when you define our transition as moving from fossil fuel to cleaner energies, you're not speaking to us. If you speak to that person, Honorable MP, in your constituency, and you tell her that we are moving from fossil fuel to clean energy, they will be shocked. They will not understand what you're saying. So our transition is different. And that's what we keep saying, that there is no one transition. Okay? So what were the pit stops for the Western world? Biomass to coal, cleaner coal, to oil and gas, and now moving to renewables. But you have to look at it in the sense that it is not one energy source that you're dealing with. It is an adjustment in the energy mix. The energy mix will remain a mix. You'll have different sources, and it will be a mix for both primary energy and secondary energy. So now what we need to discuss in Africa today is what is the most reasonable energy mix that we should have. How much of gas should it have? How much of crude oil should it have? How much of renewables should it have? And how much of all the other sources should it have? That is the conversation that we should have. Why are we talking about transition? And I want to disagree with my friend Dickens Kamajisha. That when we make statements like fossil fuel is a danger, that is misleading. I'm not going to say it is incorrect, but I will say it is misleading. Why? Because what we are dealing with, that is the climate change, is not a result of one contributing industrial sector. Climate change is caused or affected by the emissions of greenhouse gas, of greenhouse gas emissions. Let me put it that way. What constitutes greenhouse gas emissions? So we can go gas by gas, okay? Emission by emission. We can also go for contribution by contribution. As we sit here as human beings, we are emitting carbon dioxide. So we are contributing. When we burn trees, we are contributing. The highest contribution of greenhouse gas emissions in Uganda is not fossil fuel. It is deforestation. It is burning of trees. Human activity, decaying plants, fossil fuel, animals, all these elements contribute greenhouse gas emissions. So the conversation must be complete. We can kill oil and gas industry today, yes. Let's kill it. Say zero contribution. In 40 years or 30 years from today, we'll be talking about whether we should reduce the population of humans. Is that a reasonable conversation we should have? Or cows. Actually, today, there are people in Ireland and other places who are fighting farming and going into supermarkets and pouring dairy products. Is that the conversation? No. The conversation is looking at all sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And not all of them are bad. We need carbon dioxide to have oxygen to survive. So it has to continue to be emitted. The conversation is how much of this carbon dioxide that we have and all greenhouse gas emissions are absorbed by the carbon sinks, by technology that we have today. And then, what is the balance? Now, what do we do to ensure that that balance is neutralized? So that's why the conversation becomes net zero as opposed to zero emissions. Because we cannot stop emitting. As long as we live, we shall emit. Now, in a new book recently released by a very eminent publisher called the Energy Map. It's available in Aristoc. I encourage
as you summarize.
Yes, I encourage you to look for it. The new map. The new map. No, the new map, sorry. It's the new map. It's in Aristoc. It's available. I think it's about 80,000 shillings. And I will quote, on page 253, there is a list of contributions in terms of gigatons of carbon dioxide by each industry, and how much of that is absorbed by oceans, by trees, and by the carbon sinks that we have today, plus technology, carbon capture and sequestration. And in that book, the author, based on different data that he has collected, says the excess greenhouse gas emissions are 4 gigatons. And that's what we need to deal with. So when we talk about energy transition, we need to look at the Western world and ask them, of the 4 gigatons excess, can you remove 3.5? Let them show us in their NDCs that they're able to do that. And then Africa, Asia, and others, we say the 0.5 gigatons we shall remove by our interventions. And then we'll have a net zero situation. But the development must continue. So our interventions must project what we are going to generate tomorrow and how to make it neutral. In the oil and gas sector today in Uganda, we have had interventions that have reduced our carbon emissions. So our projects will emit 13 kilograms of carbon dioxide per barrel for scope 1 and scope 2. That is the lowest in the world today in all oil and gas producing fields. But that 13, we plan to neutralize it, to make it net zero. How? We are planting trees. As you know, our target is to plant 40 million trees in the next 3 years, but our target is 100 million trees. Now, if we increase the carbon sinks, you can produce oil and gas, you can produce minerals, you can farm, as long as what you produce is nearly neutralized. And that's a conversation that we should be having. Lastly, Chair, I'm sorry I've taken a lot of time. When we talk about eco, fair, just transition, we're not playing a blame game. We are saying this is the right thing to do because we are dealing with carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions. And when you look at the Kyoto Protocol had these fair principles. It was very clear, and it did envisage different transitions. It is possible to say that even the Paris Agreement says the same. If you look at the quote that he made, which is correct. And so I think that's the conversation we need to go to. How much is Uganda emitting? How much is Africa emitting? How do we ensure we have neutrality? And we demand that conversation to be had elsewhere. Thank you.
But before you start, and even following on what he has been saying, Uganda is known to have good policies. Very straightforward policies, but implementation deficit is a problem. So how do we make sure that we implement our policies? There is this joke that good policies are made in Uganda, perfected in Kenya, and implemented in Rwanda. So how do we implement all those good policies that we are talking about, planting I don't know how many million trees? Because I am asking this one against the background. That is you. Against the background where we say this money is money from oil will be invested in infrastructure. But the first windfall we got was invested in fighter jets. I don't know how we are going to balance implementation and policies, among other things. And you are a civil servant, please.
Thank you very much.
You need to balance being in good intentions and being wise.
Thank you very much, Professor. First of all, I want to thank the team. This is a very good conversation. I kept seeing Dickens smiling. It should have taken a little more time for us to discuss. It's a very brilliant discussion. But I'm sure the organizers next time will give us a whole week to just discuss these issues because we are just jumping over them. Professor, I will finish with the question you've just given me. So I want to thank all of us. I will start with the one on what else do we need to do? Are we just resisting transition? We are not resisting transition. you will have to be so stupid to resist transition. We are not. We are just resisting coping transitions as a country. So it's been clear at the global level, we agree that we must contextualize our transition within our own context. I made a statistic here when I say 2% of the financing by the global partners comes to Africa for renewable energy. Now I want to see from this room, where do we get the money from? And those are the conversations that we are trying to have. What are the best ways we can finance that good transition that me and you, my colleague Dickens, you agree is the right thing to do? So if we can be advised on a better way to get money, we are happy to leave this oil in the ground. You know, we are happy to, and we've made this. When I attended the ministerial meeting in Kigali that produced the communique at COP, we said it clearly. Value this oil, give us this money. We are not in the business of digging holes. So Uganda doesn't want to just go around digging holes. We want to be given money to make sure that we finance this transition. So as long as you're giving us 2%, we are going to look for this money because we must transition. That is one point. I liked the comments by that young lady as well. She talked about a number of things, particularly on harmonizing communication and all the good things, including the proposal of these green parks. Those are good proposals that we will be happy to pursue, and at some stage we will deepen that conversation. But as part of our energy transition plan for the country that the PS talked about, these are some of the proposals that we want to put in it, and at a stage when we have a consultation with amongst the many stakeholders, including these are issues that we would want to put into that proposal and plan and take to the next COP. So I'm happy that you came up with us, and that will also capture aspects of communication. Africa energy transition, how do we get a percentage that contributes? There is a whole section on this transition plan that looks at how we want to finance this transition that we are aspiring. We are not saying transition must wait. We must not go through dirty oils to get to the good energy. It's not always going to be one way. We can leapfrog. For telephones, we leapfrogged. Some of us, before we had any phone, we went straight to a smartphone. We didn't wait for the wires to come. So we are not in any way saying we are going to have to go through everything bad to get to a good one. But it's going to be an integrated approach. We shall have to go through some of these resources, manage them responsibly, and we've been challenging people that are advocating, that show us a country that has put in place better mechanisms. And I'm not in any way saying that our oil and the way we have managed it is the best, but there are things that we put in place that we've learned that you can actually develop these resources very well. So we are not saying that everything must go through bad. There will be options of leapfrogging, but there will be options that we will take that will go through those painful ways and manage our resources very meaningfully. The PhD scholar, we are not resisting at all. What we are resisting is copying what is not applicable to our case. And because we are having pretender partners, that's why we are saying let's chart our own journey. This is an African level position. And I'm sure you and me, I can't tell you to go through the journey that I went through to get my 7 kids. You have to chart your own journey. So we're also charting our own journey. Otherwise, I'm happy to invite you to copy my journey, which is not going to be a good one. There was a comment from the legal scholar on these negotiations. These things, we've tried to put them into consideration, but we are government and we are people that have to put these within our abilities. Our wish is if we could put all these ideal processes together, but sometimes these processes are ideal. I was in the university, I taught in the university. Some of these theories, when you come to practice, you have to contextualize them. Some of them are an ideal process of negotiating, of putting this. Sometimes the actual context in implementation desires that you take a few things, but those are very good recommendations. And I like the proposal by Professor, I think it came from Professor, and I think the Honorable Minister, on the certificate. Maybe the conversations that we are going to have around this transition will also require that we come up with some certificates of renewable as part of a way of fundraising. I think this is a very good proposal. I now want to speak to the hard question. Whenever you come to government, you request for enabling environment. And I think that's the minimum any government can put in place. You must have an enabling environment. Those of you who are parents, you must create an enabling environment before you marry. So for us, we do a good job in setting a good process. So as government, we provide good policies, good strategies, good ambitions. We provide an environment that allows private sector to flourish. And I think that has to be appreciated, particularly in renewable energy. If you look at the global ranking of areas, destinations for investment in renewable energy, a predictable regulatory environment, Uganda is amongst those that rank highest. And that has to be given the highest rank. I mean, the credit that it deserves. Now, whether other people are implementing very fast, I think the ultimate goal will come in how far they can go. And they are all processes and indications that show that we are not totally lagging behind. Some of these ambitions that we have, for example, when we jumped in our NDC and went to 24.7, it's a good intention on government. If we achieved half of that, we will not have failed also. There are countries that are performing well because they've set very achievable targets. Let me give you an example in energy access. Some countries count all households within 1 kilometer from the grid have achieved access to energy. We don't count it like that. So some of those countries you're thinking are performing so well, they are reporting high levels of access, but they don't actually have those levels. They've just tweaked the metrics. Otherwise, why would Kenya, with that level of electricity access, be struggling with chuck and firewood today? If indeed we are performing so badly. So we may be looking humble in implementation, but we also following our good way. And we have made the environment favorable for private sector to invest, and indeed government continues to invest. So it's not totally true that we don't implement. Maybe we are being too ambitious as we set our targets. So our policies are good, and the government has made the obligation. We are calling upon all of us, private sector, to work with us. And I'm happy for the first time sitting in a meeting with civil society organization. This has been a very brilliant meeting, because we are not just charting an agenda that appears like a foreign agenda. We are charting a Ugandan agenda, and I liked all the contributions that came. So I want to see one of these days, civil society with placards, going to COP, going to streets, saying, this energy transition you're telling us, Europeans, is not ours. We have ours. Say that you, for the first time, you're on the side of government, saying, indeed, you've told us what we want to do, but we think this is not exactly what we want. If we do that one day, then we become partners. But every time you come and say, the whites have told us that oil is bad. It is bad, but can you conserve poverty? I want us to have the next dialogue that we are going to have in the oil region. Let's not have it in these hotels. And I know Professor is about to stop me. But I want us to have the next dialogue by Siatini in the oil region and invite those oil people and start convincing them that you've actually been mistreated. We are telling you the truth. I want to hear them saying, we have not compensated them properly. Because I don't think all of them will say, that is it. There could be gaps, and Dickens, I agree with you. There could be work in progress that we are working on, but it's not clear that oil coming has been a curse to that region. And we know Nigeria and other places where it's been a curse. So I'm happy that for the first time I am seeing civil society that is charting clearly a journey that is government. That wait, we are not going to listen to those international people. We are charting this journey. Oil is here because you're giving us 2%. And that's why I like this conversation that we are having today. Mr. Chairman, I want to stop here because the time is well spent. Thank you.
Thank you. I think civil society should listen to government, but it can also listen to international organizations and try to make a balance. They say good intentions need also wise decisions. We shall try to balance. And the government should listen to us, and we should listen to them, and the private sector should listen to us, and international community should listen to us. They should also listen. We should also listen to them. We should have a good mix. I thank you. I would want now to hand over to Siatini to make, on the program, they talk about the way forward, not the way backward. Let's now listen to Siatini to see the way forward, not the way backward. Yeah, you seem to be willing to go, please. But not everybody, I haven't allowed everybody. Siatini, please give us the way forward, not the way backward.
Thank you so much. I think this is, we can give another round of applause for our panelists, but also for having such an engagement that is striving to have this discussion at a more broader approach of having all stakeholders, especially for those that are represented here on the panel, when it comes to members of parliament, the policymakers, the civil society organizations that are trying to do so much on minerals, UNOC, as well as the Ministry of Energy. We truly appreciate at least from even the feedback that we received, it was very positive to how much you wanted to contribute on the panel and in this discussion. And we are grateful for that kind of relationship that we can build on to and to take this conversation further. But even from how we have seen this discussion, there is more that needs to be done to how far we can break down a lot of the issues. And I've been taking note, and so has everyone, at least from Siatini, and those that are online that have also chipped in to have us dissect the issue on the energy transition, but more so for the Uganda agenda, and also for what can be able to make sense to not only us here in the room, but even to those that are going to be impacted when it comes to a number of the different policies and actions that may come from this transition. Just to mention a few things, we definitely need more transparency when it comes to this discussion on energy transition, leaving it out of the room of policymakers, but also to us, the actors. And that's what we are striving to do as Siatini. We want to ensure that we can bring all players on board, but also to ensure that the common person is also understanding these issues, because they are quite broad, as mentioned, and there is need for us to do better when it comes to implementing these policies and how they actually impact a number of the citizens, and engaging further to see to it that we kind of have a reasonable approach and one voice towards this. We are glad to know that we are also able to dialogue even after this. We, as Siatini, have a number of discussions that we have put in line. This is just the start, and we have been always having this discussion on energy transition, but we want to now dive into further broadening the elements of minerals, broadening the elements of oil, how best to do it, but also even for the common person to be involved in the discussion. So I'm grateful, and we thank you all. We thank you, our participants, for being here. We look forward to engaging with you further. We know that we have taken note of your details, but we shall also keep in touch in a number of the different series of discussions that we want to have. And I believe we shall still engage with you even after this. I believe we have another discussion we want to hold around the energy transition. So thank you so much, and we look forward to engaging with you further. Please don't get tired of us when we knock on your office doors and try to signal for urgency in some of these issues. Thank you so much. Also, just while we are here, we want to have a group photo. It's good to capture the moment, but also to hold all of us as being champions to some of these discussions that we're having. So we can please find a way to organize you. Just let's have a group photo together.